And this is actually really interesting that people with mental issues, I have found a lot of vegans have mental problems, but actually they had them before they became vegan.
I started having hallucinations about when I was maybe 16 years old, in the middle of high school, and I can't say what caused them and what made them start at that age, but I do know that mental illness does run in my family. I have at least 2 relatives that have had schizophrenia. The hallucinations that I most commonly had on a almost daily basis was seeing bugs everywhere. Spiders, ants, cockroaches, just all over my walls, ceiling, floor, sometimes covering my body. And less frequent hallucinations would be I'd see like random objects turn into different animals like frogs or weasels or something. I remember often when I'd ride my bike, I'd see some of the weeds popping out of the ground turn into frogs and then like kind of jump at me. I've seen tissue boxes and stuff turn into lizards. And that would happen maybe 1 to 3 times a week. And the more rare ones were the more kind of scary, violent ones. And I'd see people just materialize out of thin air and just come charge at me with knives or baseball bats, and then they just disappear all of a sudden. And I'd also see skin and flesh melt off of people who were just right in front of me talking to me.
I at least have quite a few characteristics that would fall under the definition of antisocial personality disorder, particularly sociopathy. I was diagnosed by somebody who's actually a psychologist. I've had suicidal depression since I was about 6. That's when I attempted suicide. I suffer from body dysmorphic disorder. It really affects me mentally, and then I feel really freaking crappy, and then I want to binge more, and it turns into this vicious cycle where I just get more and more depressed and feel crappier and crappier and crappier. I've gotten better at dealing with this in recent years. It's still an ongoing issue, but I remember in high school, like early high school, it really got out of control. I was on a swim team, and I ended up getting really severely bullied, and then to deal with all of that, I really started binging, and I gained a lot of weight from grade 10 to 11. When I finally decided to lose weight, I had to lose over 60 pounds from grade 10 to 11. So I got fat as hell from doing that. A year ago, I was involved in a court case where my mental health was brought into question, so I got a psychiatric assessment to prove that I'm mentally sane. The doctor who conducted the assessment was Dr. Julian Goger, a licensed psychiatrist, and this assessment was done at the Manassa Clinic in Toronto. The diagnosis and prognosis was that there is no evidence that I suffer from any mental illnesses, including schizophrenia, and that I am of no threat to myself or others, and I pose no risk to the public. I decided to go on antidepressants and try those, see how things went. It just got to a point, the depression was so bad that I couldn't function, and I was actually worried that I might just, kill myself. So I took 2 days off of taking my meds. Really bad idea. As soon as I did that, on the second day, I had really, really strong suicidal urges. I came within an inch of attempting suicide, and I had to ask Jasmine to hide all of the sharp objects in the house that I could use to kill myself with.
Why don't we have kids? Will I ever adopt? I legally can't adopt because I've been clinically diagnosed with mental health issues. I can't tell by the haircut, so that's just instant. Cannot adopt under Australian law.
Some of you don't know, some of you might know, diagnosed with eating disorders myself, clinically diagnosed by psychiatrists, psychologists, and binge eating disorder and anorexia.
I've had clinical suicidal depression. Tim's never even been diagnosed. I was diagnosed. I had a clinical diagnosis here.
I was diagnosed with Asperger's many, many years ago. They gave me medication to take. I'm like, I look at the medication, I've got side effects, I ain't taking this shit.
Clinically, I've been diagnosed with ADD many a long time ago. I've never taken any ADD medication in my entire life. with the exception of street speed back in the 90s, until recently when I took some Ritalin, which I got from a local doctor.
Post-traumatic stress disorder, whatever, which I've been diagnosed as well.
And I've been diagnosed with a lot of stuff. I really can't tell. A lot of stuff. Haircut disorder therapy, etc. And one of them was called GAD, G-A-D, Generalized Anxiety Disorder, Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder, etc. So I clinically can speak from experience, all right?
If you had met me 7 years ago, I was a mess. You say one word to me, I would have flipped. I feel 10 times better. I mean, I've had therapy for the last 8 months, and it's just been amazing to deal with a lot of the things that happened in my past.
Some people are exactly the same. So they had mental health issues before, okay, like I did, and now they're vegan, and they've still got them. I've had breakthroughs in therapy. Breakthroughs. I'm feeling so much better than I used to. I've got to the bottom of a lot of my things that actually led me into addiction when I was 14. Led me into all of my drug use, 14, 15. My addiction stemmed from things that happened in my childhood that I had no control over. My way of dealing with that was to lead into to drugs, then lead into gangs, then led into the violence, and then led me to prison. Now, I spent a week in a mental health ward. My mental health issues were drug-induced, most of them. And the other ones were stemmed back from my childhood. And the other ones were from being in such a violent environment for so long. So yeah, I'm feeling so much better. Some people aren't. Some people still have issues. They might have had pre-existing mental health issues. It's not because of veganism. And that's coming from me, someone who was suicidal in the past. You know, when I was on drugs, amphetamines, I used to have repetitive thoughts about... I would fabricate scenarios in my mind through paranoia. Like, I literally was like, you know, this is definitely happening. And then I'd be like, boom, boom, boom. Like, it was like ruminating and creating and using my paranoia to fabricate these scenarios. All I know is I've tried medication and it messed me up more. Anti-anxiety, antidepressants I was on, antipsychotics I was on. It turned me into a zombie. And I had this gun, and there was one in the chamber, and I turned the safety off and put it inside of my mouth. And I held my finger over the trigger, and I was just like sort of flirting with the idea of just bang, because it's a really, you know, it's just a really impulsive thing you could do. I'm not saying that I'm completely okay from what happened in my past. I mean, it's a journey, and every day I'm, you know, slowly getting better. I mean, there's obviously some demons inside of me that I'm trying to work through.
I was feeling really bad. My depression got way worse. My anxiety got way worse. My candida, surprisingly, got way worse. And then about a year later, I decided to really involve myself in eating disorder. It was a completely conscious thought. Like, I knew what I wanted to do. I knew how to do it. I read online. I went on forums. Like, I knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to hurt myself in this way. I even had an Anna blog. The more weight I lost, the more depressed I got. And it got to a point where I was completely suicidal. I decided that I'm going to kill myself, and it was like a set thing. I knew how I wanted to do it. Everything was already set, but I had a bit of a doubt because I never really fully engaged myself in therapy, even though I had been in therapy since I was 9. I decided I'm going to hospitalize myself. So I was hospitalized in a mental ward for about 1 year. I also started getting really addicted to Valium, which is a tranquilizer, and it's really addictive. So I started binging on that. I was literally high all the time, and I would take more and more to get more high, to be less present in my own life.
Someone who has struggled with trauma and PTSD, with mental health issues,
depression and anxiety and life-ending thoughts. I struggled with life-ending thoughts for around 10 years of my life, as well as self-harm. I had an addiction to self-harm basically from the age of 12 to the age of 21. I was going to therapy.
I was constantly practicing self-harm. I would beat myself in front of the mirror. I would shout horrible things at myself in the mirror just to hate all day long. And the only thing that would come out of that was it would further disconnect me from the belief that I would ever reconnect to the experience of being alive. I survived my suicide. I checked into rehab where I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, erectile dysfunction, bipolar disorder, suicidal depression, anxiety disorder, sleep disorder, attention deficit disorder, an obsessive compulsive personality disorder.
I'm going to be talking about eating disorders, depression, anxiety, self-harm, suicide.
Finally, I was admitted to a kid's psychiatric ward in 2010. Like I said, it was a psychiatric ward, so it wasn't just people with eating disorders, but I was also suicidal and self-harming at this time. I have fallen back into depression since then, and then gotten through that, and I still struggle with anxiety and things, but from my eating disorders, I'm free.
I'm not diagnosed with hypochondria, but I think I have that. I read someplace that, oh, if your knee hurts, it means you have kidney disorder, and then I believe that I have kidney disorder. It's a real issue. I mean, I have been very open about all my medical problems and stuff. You know, I have obsessive compulsive disorder. I was diagnosed when I was a kid. ADD, attention deficit disorder, basically you can't focus. I've been to therapy since a child. I was put on medication starting at 7 years old. I was 7 years old. I've been bullied my whole life. And lately I've been thinking about suicide a lot.
Okay guys, I am in the line at the pharmacy right now to pick up my medicine, but I kind of want to tell y'all about like what's been going on with me. Y'all already know that I have OCD, ADHD, anxiety, depression, trichotillomania, and it also brought out my trichotillomania, so I would pull out my eyelashes like I used to when I was younger. If you don't know about my trichotillomania, I actually have a video over it.
And my mental health issues also manifested with eating disorders. Anyway, at that time I had quite severe bouts of what I now know is OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. I had to lock the door, push the handle, Paul, the door is locked. Paul, the door is locked. Wait for a second. The door is absolutely definitely locked. Over the last 3 to 4 years, on many occasions, I have suffered crippling depression, debilitating stress and anxiety, and yes, even suicidal thoughts and actual planning.
I've been completely suicidal where I've wanted to kill myself, but cutting has just been such a different thing. I was like 12. I remember after I did it, I was like really scared, and my form of self-harming has always been cutting, and I have scars on my arms and my legs. I don't know where I got the idea from, but in my head I had heard voices that had told me like it was a great idea, so I just did it.
I have had a history of drug abuse in the past. I've been sober since I've been 21. I went to Narcotics Anonymous and stuff like that, so I'm super fortunate to be sober at this point. I was a pill addict. I overcame binge eating last October, so I'm pretty happy about that.
I was diagnosed with the schizophrenic tendencies last year, and that's because I've been having auditory hallucinations and paranoia. I have hallucinations, I hear voices all the time, and I'm kind of just deal with that. I deal with negative voices, really mean and nasty ones. I deal with just regular narrating voices, I guess, if that makes sense, like just voices that narrate my day throughout the day, just narrating what I'm doing. If I'm like, for example, making coffee in the morning, they're just literally talking about what I'm doing, and either they'll critique what I'm doing or like laugh at me, or you know, just talk to me, I guess, in my head.
I was at a very dark time in my life. Along with binge eating, I was struggling with depression, anxiety, panic and anxiety attacks, suicidal thoughts, and self-harm in the form of more than just eating.
I had horrible depression and mental problems my whole life, schizophrenia, and when I switched, all that also went away. And I remember suffering from that since I was 12. I remember the voices starting when I was 12.
So that's when
the eating disorder just grabbed hold because it was control, right? I had complete control over that, and I had control over nothing else in my life, or so I felt. I was just out of control. And so that's when it really started progressing and got really bad. And anorexia eventually turned into bulimia, and this is over 2 and 3 years, and then I tried to commit suicide twice.
After my junior year in college, my anorexia got really out of control. My hair fell out, I lost my fingernails, my period stopped. I had bruises over my entire body, a gastric ulcer, and an enlarged liver. And I was actually suffering from a severe protein deficiency. But the problem was that anorexia was considered a psychological disorder. So I was put in the locked ward of a mental hospital, along with people who were criminally insane, and my roommate was an arsonist, where I was admitted to another psychiatric hospital, which was marginally better than the first. I became so depressed that I attempted suicide. But an angel was looking out for me, and I made it to the hospital in time. Now, in hindsight, a suicide attempt was not a smart move for someone who disliked mental hospitals. Just saying.
I haven't mentioned this before, but I have struggled a lot with mood and emotional disorders. I've had an eating disorder. I have been hospitalized involuntarily with suicidal depression.
You know, like I used to be this binge prone, starved, anorexic mentality, you know, just depressed person on the verge of suicide.
So I was diagnosed when I was 18. I was actually diagnosed with anxiety and depression. I was struggling with an eating disorder. I was basically at the lowest point of my life.
I have a lot of experience with eating disorders, anxiety, a lot of mental issues.
I'm not sure if I was orthorexic, but I just had a very, very bad eating disorder which almost killed me. But, you know, my whole life I've lived with severe anxiety and panic attacks, and of course that, like, I'm not going to go into it now, that was actually a medical condition that I had. Because I had a very rare disease where my body produces too much adrenaline. That was a whole thing, almost died from it, but like it's all good now. But because I have severe nerve damage from where the operation was, I have been taking for the last 8 years very, very strong pain medication. I was in rehab. I was taking drugs. I was taking hardcore substances up to 7 to 8 times a day for the last year and a half whilst you were watching me.
Hi, I'm Slightly Crazy Vegan, and many of you are probably wondering why I chose that name. See, the thing is that I have mental health issues, and sometimes they show. You might never notice it on my videos because obviously I hide it and I edit, you know, I only show what I want to show. So you're probably wondering, okay, what is your mental illness? So my mental illness is obsessive compulsive disorder, but I also have attention deficit hyperactive disorder. So I was diagnosed both of those things very late in life. ADHD, I didn't get diagnosed until I was 12. I got on medication, and the medication was really good. It really helped me while I was in school, but it came with a lot of health effects.
Meanwhile, I'm battling with this eating disorder. So it got to the point where, you know, like some days I'd spew 4, 5, 6 times in a day. I was spewing every day. And I didn't want to be. Like, I was so addicted, man. I was so addicted to binge eating and then spewing that I'd think about it all the time. I'm like, as soon as there's an opportunity, let's say I was at my mum and dad's and they left, like I'd be anxious waiting for them to leave. I'm like, please, like, oh, hurry up and get out of here so that I can binge and spew. I was literally crazy. You know, I was in a drug-induced psychosis. All my thoughts were broadcast to anyone who wanted to tune in. You know, I was thinking things about aliens tuning in. I went to a psych ward. I was there for 4 days, and they let me go home promising that I would go home and, you know, continue treatment. And I was on these antipsychotic drugs for ages, like a few months or whatever. Just fully, like, lost my sense of my grip of reality, lost it big time. Like, this drug binge had just massively messed with my mind badly. And then it only all ended, though, the day I started my vow of silence.
James Aspey took a vow of silence for 365 days to promote compassion to animals.
I have found a lot of vegans have mental problems, but actually they had them before they became vegan.